Welcome to the Underdark. I'm your little devil host, and today I've prepared the most horrifying stories of that guys, Mary Sue's, and cheating players, all for your listening pleasure. Feel free to tell me your thoughts about any of these stories in the comments, or if you'd like to share a story of your own with me, just submit it to the form in the description and who knows, maybe you'll be featured in the next video. But for now, let's get started. Story 1 is from r/rpghorrorstories. DM straight up said if I did enough damage, he would negate it and the boss would walk away with 1 hit point because she is not supposed to die. I finally achieved the dream of many forever DMs and found myself as a player in a new campaign. While I went into this with an open mind and am mostly happy to finally be able to play, our DM is not good. Now, to their credit, they are new to 5e, though apparently they know Pathfinder really well. Unfortunately, they seem to have fallen into the trap of novel writing, i.e. they have a whole plot in mind of what will happen and we're just following along. The first session was a little heavy-handed, but that's okay. Sometimes you need to set the stage for what's going on. The group was passing through gang territory and my eloquence bard rolls a 25 persuasion accompanied by a bribe that the DM suggested I do, to be left alone. The DM responds with, "Okay, they attack you anyway, because I can't have you avoid all my encounters." This is literally the first one we've ever had. Session 2, we find a strange device surrounded by a magic field. Any attempts to touch it are met with, "Are you sure?" by the DM, so scratch that, I guess. There seems to be nothing we can do. The device is extremely heavy, surrounded by magic, and is implied to be some sort of huge bomb, so we elect to leave the area and inform our higher-ups, we're guards, about what we found. Oh really? None of you guys are going to cast Dispel Magic on it? I'm really surprised none of you thought to take that spell. Dude, we can't take it yet. We're level 3. Oh. Suddenly, an alarm goes off. The mysterious woman you saw earlier returns with 4 henchmen. Roll initiative. This is basically how it went. We'd seen the woman earlier when we were sneaking in, and she was presented as some sort of powerful suspect behind this plot to blow up the city. Now, we'd already had combat the previous session and hadn't rested, so I was down in spell slots and bardic inspirations. On our turns, the barbarian and I focused our attention on the boss lady and used our best moves, culminating with me burning my only remaining bardic inspiration and 2nd level spell slot on her. We both did pretty decent damage, remember we're only level 3, and then it was the lady's turn. And she teleported away. This would be okay, classic cheeky DM, if he didn't immediately say, "You're not supposed to kill her. She is not in the fight. If you'd taken her down, I would have given her 1 HP left and had her leave anyway." Like, dude, I get you're new, but don't tell us that. Anyway, we survived the fight and elect to return to our base and inform our higher-ups about what we found. Then, after the session, DM messages the group saying, "Good job. FYI, you guys are going to be arrested and put on trial next session. Make sure to prepare yourselves." For what? What's the charge? Not defusing the thing? Not being able to learn Dispel Magic at level 3? Investigating a crime scene as a party of guards? Ugh. Anyway, it's only been 2 sessions. Hopefully DM learns to loosen up and stop the train. At least I get to play. Edit. Since people keep asking if I've spoken to him, yes, I've spoken to the DM many times during the whole 2 sessions we've had. I taught him how to make PCs, roll for insight/investigation, tried to help him figure out what the 5e equivalent of a city knowledge check is, told him what bardic inspiration is and how it works, and no, it's not OP, it's a literal class feature. strongly implied that only letting someone make a check if they have proficiency in a skill isn't the best idea, and gave him feedback at the end of the first session on how he was a bit stiff at first, but got better midway through when he relaxed the story and just let us RP and bond as a group. I've given him a lot of feedback and tips, but I'm still allowed to express frustration in a Reddit post considering I signed up to be a player, not a backseat DM. And our second story, also from RPG Horror Stories, is titled, I can assure you, dear DM, that the sex scene was absolutely critical for my character's backstory. Let's get to reading. Back when I was DMing a lot, I used to post ads for my games with application questionnaires so that I could filter out players I thought I wouldn't really vibe with, and create groups I thought would get on well. This failed spectacularly, but that's a story for another post. This one is about Bob. Bob really bamboozled me by submitting an application I thought was really good. He had a solid character idea, clearly put thought into how he would implement him into my world, and by and large, I was sold. I had a quick chat with him just to tell him how I would run games, when was session 0, and what I expected from his backstory, as I did with all players. I had quite a bit of lore for the world, but mostly tried to give the players enough to work with without lore dumping unless specifically asked. He was aiming to play a warlock, so we talked patrons and I sent over the basic lore details of a few so that he could draw from it for his backstory. This included a celestial who grew too prideful, was cast into the hells, and through unimportant lore escaped and became a goddess of redemption, a minor deity who would be the matron of clerics, paladins, sorcerers, or warlocks. I sent him her character art. This turns out to be a mistake. Bob was into it. In fact, Bob was too into it. Session 0 goes by without too much issue, and session 1 is 2 weeks later, giving players enough time to lock in classes and send in backstories. Well, Bob is now basically pestering me for details on his patron's backstory for almost a week. And while I dig his enthusiasm, this seems a bit too much. Then his backstory lands in my inbox. It is something. His warlock is clearly some sort of main character. He took the idea he came to me with and mashed it with every single thing he found cool in the lore. This was now a pirate and a mercenary, but secretly the prince of a country, and also secretly ASMR, because while his mother is the queen, his father is this world's version of Asmodeus. In this setting, a god of retribution and self-sacrifice. He kills so many people and is so tough and scary, yada yada. All this at level 1, mind you. When he is left with nothing on account of a betrayal by his first mate as inevitable as it is stupid, the first mate made a deal with Asmodeus' second in command to overthrow Asmodeus, and this is somehow orchestrated by trying to kill Bob's character. He is saved by the goddess of redemption who apparently had her eye on him for a while. This would be fine-ish, except it turns into the story of how they fall in love, then a sex scene, which he writes in full. It is like 30% of his entire backstory. I am deeply uncomfortable. To put a cherry on top of this sundae, the pact is formed because he is so good at sex. The goddess gives him warlock powers and is now his girlfriend. I inform him I want no part of this BS. He says he thought this was a game for adults. After all, I tagged that I was looking for players who were 18 plus. I explained this is because there was violence and swearing and sex happens in this world. I just have no desire to engage in RPing it or reading explicit prose about it. He goes, "Aha," and calls me a hypocrite. I block him. The end. And our final story for today from the very same subreddit. titled Session Zeros Are Important, apparently. Been scrolling this up for a while now, decided to add my own little story, although it's not exactly a horror story, more like a disappointment story. I'm pretty new to D&D. Like many others, I decided I wanted to give it a shot after playing Baldur's Gate 3. Always wanted to play, don't really have friends who'd be interested. So my socially anxious self hopped on Roll20 to find a beginner-friendly online game to join. I responded to a couple of listings, but only ever got a response from one of them, the one with the most interesting premise and setting. We were all fae pretending to be human, infiltrating the royal court of a kingdom that has banned all magic/magic beings with the goal to bring said magic back into the kingdom through means that were up to us to decide, aka friendly negotiations or chaos and destruction. We used D&D 5e, rolled for which subspecies of fae we'd play, all of them homebrew, and our assigned job at court. We never ended up having a session 0. I decided to make my PC a bit of a happy-go-lucky airhead, not wanting to go with the stereotypical lone wolf introvert. Having heard enough horror stories, I didn't want to be one of those players for my first ever D&D game. Despite being very introverted and quiet myself, I wanted to at least try. I just wanted to tag along with the rest of the group and told the DM from the start that I'd like to stay in the background so I could go with the flow, let the other more experienced players take the lead, warm up to the whole thing. She agreed and gave my character sheet her stamp of approval. My fae was a dryad/circle of the land druid. Never got to subclasses. We didn't even level up once over the course of multiple sessions, who was switched out at birth with a noble child. So they grew up amongst royals, having to hide their identity in fear of prosecution once their magical features started emerging as they got older. They were given the task by a mysterious someone at court to welcome these other fae, the other players, who'd be coming to infiltrate the place. And my PC was just happy to finally meet others of their kind. And this is where the disappointment starts. Every single one of them was a loner, with no motivation whatsoever to actually bring magic back to the kingdom. We had the cannibalistic, edgy rogue, who honestly was the most interesting player, the introverted artist ranger, who'd rather talk to her animals than anyone else in the group, and such a mumbling, in-character voice I had trouble understanding what she was saying half the time. And the guy with literally no personality whatsoever. He was just there. He tried to stick with the plot, but I'm pretty sure he lost interest pretty early on. My PC struggled so hard to be the glue that kept this group together, as they were desperate to make friends with them and they were just not interested. All of them were doing their own things, not really motivated to do what they came here for, and the DM didn't really help either, as she had no real plot hooks for us and the NPCs were no help, not giving us anything to work with. In her words, it was a roleplay heavy game and the story was up for us to decide. Our actions would be the determining factor as to what happens. The few events that did happen had no consequences. There was no progression and we stayed in the same location the whole time, for weeks/months of in-game time. Every time we thought we got some interesting new information, it led exactly nowhere. It felt like my class or stats didn't even matter. We were barely made to roll for anything. There wasn't any combat, not even once. It was boring. What kind of broke me was an event, a ball or banquet or something, I can't remember, where other magical beings, royals from other kingdoms, were invited. So the entire premise became irrelevant. After we found out that the king just upheld the previous king's laws and anti-magic rhetoric, but is kinda meh about it himself and doesn't really care. So So why were we here exactly? It's like all the stakes that we had were just thrown right out the window. We could have turned into our Fae forms right then and there and people would have just shrugged. Which also made my entire PC's backstory about fearing the consequences of showing their true form obsolete. Or at least that's what it felt like. DM sat us down after that session telling us that we weren't going to continue the campaign as is, as none of our PCs seemed to have any motivation to do anything to work towards our goal and nothing was happening. We talked about the issues all of us had with the game. I was pretty silent throughout most of the thing, just kind of piped in by the end explaining that it was my first ever game and being thrown into the lead position where I was expected to wrangle the rest of them put me in a really uncomfortable spot, which the DM did apologize for. The final verdict? No more loners in any future game and clear directions from the DM. We ended up chatting some more, brainstorming ideas for a new campaign, all of which, not gonna lie, also sounded like they'd have similar problems. But I was down to give it another shot. In the end, the Discord server died, DM never brought up the new game we were gonna attempt, and I eventually just left. I ended up joining another game after the initial disappointment wore off, one that's still ongoing. I'm very happy with it. The DM is obviously much more experienced and guides us in the right direction, still rolling with it when we do end up hard derailing. The NPCs are so much more interesting and actually make it fun to interact with the world around. Turns out I'm not the best role player, but I do hope that the group keeps me around for future games because I'm enjoying the hell out of it. Another game I joined is text-based, which made it possible for me to play a high charisma PC who has so much riz, he already managed to seduce a god. The joys of not being put on the spot while in VC. Sorry for the long text ball, just never had the chance to share my frustration about this game with anyone. Have a good one. And that was our final story for today. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for coming by for this very first episode of my series. And I'll see you next time. Keep on rolling.